Welcome back. I hope you're all following it so far. I'm with Andrew Johnson and we're talking about an alternative theory which would explain the evolution of the Earth. Now, you mentioned the electric universe theory, and I've heard it said by many people who are perhaps linked to the military-industrial complex that electricity and gravity are inextricably linked, the subject of electrogravitics, which is what certain secret propulsion systems perhaps work on. And we might even mention the UFO phenomenon. But let's stick to planets for the moment, because I said at the beginning that this theory might explain why the Earth would eventually become a gaseous planet or a gas giant,
right?
If it was to continue expanding as you believe it is.
Right. Well, this I think does not only does the gravity effects tie in with the electric universe, as we mentioned before the break, but also one thing I wanted to mention earlier, and it's appropriate to mention it now as well, is that the heating that we talked about, which actually melted the core originally, where did that heat come from? Well, we mentioned radioactive isotopes, but another possible area is what are called telluric currents, which are these currents that are induced in the Earth's crust by the electrical field associated with the sun, which isn't generally acknowledged. So if you consider that the sun has an electrical field as well as a magnetic field, or even if you just take that it's got a magnetic field, and one might argue that the Earth is moving around the sun, and indeed it is, and then as it's moving around the sun, it's moving in either an electric field or a magnetic field or both from the sun, and therefore you're getting these currents induced in the ferrous materials and metallic materials and the metallic ores in the Earth's crust. So that in of itself is going to create more heat. Right. Now, that might be that we can never measure that heat because it's too deep down in the Earth's crust. It's something we'd never be able to measure directly. So if we then say that heat source is while the Earth is going around the sun, the Earth has always been heated internally, not just from the heat that falls on the surface from the normal infrared radiation and so forth, but we're getting this heating from electrical and magnetic effects. So that is so the Earth is continually expanding.
Well, I think if we're putting a cup of water in a microwave oven, it's an electromagnetic effect on water which turns it into steam.
Exactly.
Maybe not a good analogy, but
maybe there's some analogy like that which we're not presently aware of, and it's only happening over long periods of time and in small amounts that we wouldn't normally be able to measure. So if you say the Earth is expanding, well, let's just say that Jupiter, for example, was formed. It's much bigger from a much bigger original mass, so there was maybe more ice there. And the way that heated up, it heated up much more quickly, expanded much more quickly, and thereby it's become a gas giant. And essentially, what's happened is the water that's in the water that was originally in the core has now all come out of the core, and because of the original mass that was there, the gas has been still held by the gravity around the planet. So what was in the core is now a gas around the planet.
Right. And you think that that's what might eventually happen to the Earth?
It's possible, because we've still, based on this article in New Scientist, we've still got a greater volume of water down underneath the crust than the current volume of the oceans altogether. So it would depend on how much heating there is as to what actually happens to that water.
And is there any evidence that any of the other planets in the solar system are expanding as you think the Earth
will
be?
Well, we would argue that there is, because again, if you look at some of the, certainly not so much the planets, so we've talked about the gas giants just then of Jupiter and so forth, but if you look at some of the moons, maybe these are all undergoing the same process as well, and this is what we found quite recently. I think about 4 or 5 years ago, they announced that Europa, which is one of the moons of Jupiter, that was venting water vapor. It was coming out of the surface, and they photographed that. Ganymede, that was also found to be emitting water, venting water, I think in 2003. So was Mimas, which was a moon of Saturn. That was found to be venting water. We've also put in the more recent, second article, that the moon, they've now found recent volcanism on the moon, I think in the last, something like the last 100 million years, which appears that there are cracks in the crust of the moon, and hot material has come out from within. So the moon isn't quite as dormant as they would have you believe.
And possibly hollow.
And possibly hollow. We've had, for example, this phenomenon of transient lunar phenomena, which is something I learned about almost 30 years ago when I used to go to the astronomy club. Amateur astronomers have seen clouds of gas on the moon that come and go, and coloration, in parts of the moon that comes and goes. So is this another indication that there is this expansion in the moon still going on, and these indications that we see are a result, these clouds of gas and so forth, are a result of what's coming out of what's inside the moon and so forth.
All right, and just to go back to the subject of plate tectonics then, because I've heard you in the past, quite some time ago, probably before you, I think, it would have been before you even met Peter Woodhead, poo-pooing the whole science of plate tectonics. Just tell me why you think it's a flawed scientific theory.
Well, I think what they've done is, again, it's kind of limited hangout. It's not, I think that the basic idea is correct, that, you've got these continents moving around, and they're moving around on a substance which is more liquid. It's kind of floating, but they claim that the Earth is a constant size, so they've had to invent this subduction idea, where you actually end up with a something of greater density, or something of less density going under something of greater density. Which so the lighter material sinks into the heavier crust, which doesn't make sense, based on their own physics.
Now, let me put this question to you then. If the Earth's gravity works different to the accepted model, well, not works different, but the Earth is different internally to the accepted model, which would mean that as you get further out from the Earth, if you work out the gravitational attraction between, let's say, a satellite and the Earth, it would have a different profile.
Yes.
From a shell shape compared to a solid sphere.
Yes.
So when they're launching satellites, for example, would they not notice that the gravitational pull that they've calculated is different when they're putting their satellite in orbit?
Right, that's a very good question. Because I don't put satellites in orbit myself, and I don't know anyone that does, I don't have somebody to ask that very sensible question to.
I know someone who's tried.
Yes, well, you featured him in the programme, and it did come to mind. I know he was sending stuff up there, but I don't know if he was trying to put stuff. I suppose ultimately
that was his ultimate goal.
Put it in orbit, wasn't it? Yeah. But from what I've seen, for example, there's a story on Richard Hoagland's website, Enterprise Mission, about the Explorer 1 probe, which, if my memory serves me correctly, went up in 1958, and that was only a year after Sputnik. So it's the early days of the White World space program, and that probe, when they were monitoring it, was 12 minutes late, finishing its first orbit, which indicated to me that it had gone up too high. It had gone up higher than it should have, based on their calculations. So that would mean that potentially the force of gravity that they were, assuming was working on that probe was stronger than it actually was, because it went too high. And then also, as Peter had mentioned to me in one of the interviews, and I checked this out, if you look at some of the early probes that were sent to the moon, quite a few of them crashed. And we have to wonder if the forces of gravity which they'd ended up calculating had a small percentage error, maybe only 1 or 2% or something like that.
Right.
And that then therefore caused these orbital calculations to be incorrect. And that's why these probes crash. So we wondered, since then, do they add in a fudge factor of some kind? Which
right,
we're not aware of.
they could factor in an error that in order to correct once it's approaching the orbit.
Right.
I guess they could do that.
They could do that.
But so do you think then that, let's just assume this theory is correct, right? So do you think that in the military-industrial complex where they've actually figured all this out and they just let mainstream science plod along with its plate tectonics, or?
Well, I think that this actual theory itself probably doesn't make a lot of difference to their agenda in of itself. I think where it would make a difference is to do with the electric universe stuff, and how it may reveal certain things about the interaction between, or relationship between, electricity and gravity. I think that's where they would be more concerned about it, in those areas, not so much in the formation of the Earth. I don't think that's a big deal for them.
Right, I see, but which could link into both weaponry and propulsion.
Yes, in terms of, yeah.
Do you want to touch on either of those, Andrew?
Well,
I mean, I know I've digressed a little bit there.
Well, I mean, it's just in terms of if we're looking at the way gravity works, and if there is this electrical relationship to electricity, then they're probably not going to want to talk about that. You know, they're not going to want to talk about this, any type of relationship which might reveal how a new type of propulsion system might be engineered, or a different type of weapon system might be engineered, such as we've spoken about at some length, as it was on 9/11, that weapon system, which clearly operated on a completely different principle to, ballistic weapons, and even these more recent developments with hot directed energy weapons, such as the laser systems that they've been using on some of the ships and tanks and so forth.
If we can just finish on that argument then, Andrew, there's been a lot of rhetoric at the moment. Before I mention that, let's just give credit to Peter Woodhead, because I think he's done some sterling work there.
He has,
You know, really sort of boggled my mind when I saw that interview with you, and I thought it was very, very interesting. But just to come back to what I was saying, there's been a lot of rhetoric in the media about Russia and Putin, and they've got nuclear weapons, and we can't get rid of Trident. And when you look at what happened on 9/11, and you consider that all the evidence in Dr. Wood's book that suggests that they have weaponry which is completely different to nuclear weapons. So nuclear weapons ain't going to protect you folks against what was seen on 9/11.
Right. And I mean, one thing I will say on that, and it's in my book, is that we got quite concerned in 2007, when I say we, myself and Dr. Wood, when we found that Stephen E. Jones, the physicist, and there's a chapter about this in my book, it's called The Touch of the Hidden Hand, if people want to read about this, he was saying the same sorts of things as Michael Chertoff, who was then the head of Homeland Security, in that they were thinking that Al-Qaeda would smuggle nuclear devices into America and blow up a city. And what we thought was going to happen at that point, or we didn't think it was going to happen, but what we thought they could potentially do is, because, as we've seen on the internet, the effects of the weapon at the World Trade Center looked like a nuclear bomb's gone off. We thought, maybe they're going to try and, use the weapon again on some American city or somewhere else, and give these effects which look like a nuclear bomb has gone off, and then blame it on Al-Qaeda nuke.
Right.
And then they've now repeated that recently. They've been saying that ISIS could have access to nuclear weapons, or Russia's going to set off a nuclear weapon. So my concern was that they were going to nuke somewhere, but it wouldn't be a nuke. It'd be the weapon that was used to destroy the World Trade Center, used in a slightly different mode or in a slightly different way. And then they will blame it on Russia, Al-Qaeda, or whatever they needed to blame it on, when it was nothing to do with that.
Right. All right, Andrew, and if you want to check out 9/11 and Andrew's other research, it's Andrew's website is checktheevidence.com, and Dr. Judy Wood's book is Where Did the Towers Go? But thanks for joining me today, Andrew. It's been a fascinating discussion. I hope you're all still awake. And remember, believe none of what you hear, including what you learn at school, and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.